Morning and welcome to our morning session today where we have a number of very fascinating looking papers. Our first speaker will be Mykolas Degutis, who is a master's student. Our first speaker will be Mykolas Degutis, who is a master's student at Vilnius University. He has interest primarily in ancient philosophy and religion, especially as those apply in early Greek thought. His current work is on poetic analogies in early philosophers. And today he'll speak for us on But Lord Leap, double direction of Mimesis in the Palaikastro hymn. Mykolas?
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Very grateful to be able to read this paper for you. Special thanks, of course, to Šarūnas for making this wonderful presentation. And right now, you should be getting the handout of the hymn, by which I will try to read to you a paper that I have written. So, through a fortunate series of circumstances, a single Celtic hymn from Crete has survived and reached us in fragmentary form. Around the 1st century AD, it was engraved on a crystalline limestone, not once, but twice, due to the negligence of a sloppy stonecutter in the sanctuary of Palaikastro, Crete. Although the inscription dates to the Roman period, it is widely believed to have been conceived much earlier, most likely around the 4th century BC. The discovery of this hymn sparked a renaissance in the study of Hellenic religion. The 20th century classicist Jane Ellen Harrison, in her seminal work titled Themis, expressed the belief that this hymn might hold the key to unlocking the mysteries of Greek religion, and indeed, for many who have read it, the sentiment may ring true. While the hymn appears to describe a fertility ritual addressed to a local version of Zeus, many questions remain about the precise nature of the deity invoked, as well as the structure and purpose of the ritual, especially in comparison with other Greek religious practices. My aim in this paper is twofold. First, I explore the underrepresented and underrated idea that the hymn contains not one, as is commonly assumed, but two distinct instances of mimetic action. I argue that while one instance of mimesis, as is usually noted, occurs when Zeus is implored to leap into the fields, presumably to make them fertile, the very first mimetic action occurs earlier, in the hymn's opening, where the story of Zeus's birth is recounted. Some scholars, like the aforementioned Harrison, have alluded but never properly expanded on this possibility and its significance for the overarching hymn structure. This would suggest that there are two mimetic actions with different purposes in the hymn. Second, I would like to explore the essential relationship between them and consider how and why the second mimesis shifts direction in contrast to the first. Let us briefly review the structure of the Palaikastro hymn. In the refrain, a god, who is never explicitly mentioned by name, is praised. The first and second stanzas recount the story of this god's birth in Crete, allowing us to infer that he is most likely Zeus. Following this, in the hymn's highly corrupted middle section, a golden age of prosperity and good life, where men are governed by justice, was likely described. Finally, the god is addressed with an imperative to leap into the land, the cities, and even the citizens themselves. Most likely, this section was accompanied by an actual demonstrated belief performed by the hymn singers. Before analyzing the two mimetic actions and their relationship, it is important to clarify what is meant here by mimetic action. In this context, I use the term to refer to any action performed in an imitative relation to another event or action. Even if the imitation is not exact or literal, the act remains mimetic insofar as it references or evokes another act. With this definition in mind, we may approach the first mimetic action in the hymn. To understand it fully, I propose that the first two stanzas be read together. The first as a preparation or staging and orienting the audience toward the ritual to come, and the second as performing the act itself. The first two lines of the opening stanza state that the singers fret the song with lyres and blend it with pipes. Tantoi krekomen paktisi meiksantės am oiloisin. While such statements are quite common in Celtic hymns, I suggest that in this context they serve a more specific purpose than simply repeating a hymnic formula. If one thinks about it, it would be redundant to inform the audience about the instruments being used, since everyone present can see them in the performer's hands. It's not redundant, however, if the aim is to affirm, either to the present, or as Henry Spellman puts it, secondary audience, that the correct instruments are being used. By correct, I mean those that are appropriate to the cult practice in question. The lyres, paktides, and pipes, oloi, mentioned here are not merely employed to create pleasant sounds, they are the instruments intrinsically connected to the worship of Zeus. We encounter this idea also in Euripides' Bacchantes. I quote, "O holy haunts of Crete, where Zeus was born, there in the cave the thrice-helmed Corybantes invented for me this drum of Titan hide, and in their intense ecstatic dance they mingled with the sweet hallowing breath of Phrygian pipes, and put it into the hands of Mother Rhea, to mark the measure for the Bacchantes' ecstatic dance. And the Madden satyrs obtained it from the goddess Mother and added it to the dances of the second-year festivals in which Dionysus delights." Here, Coretes are named Corybantes, which was a usual mix-up in ancient sources that here obviously benefited the Euripidean synthesis of cults presented in the play. Euripides seems to suggest that the Coretes not only invented the drum, a favorite instrument of Bacchus, but also set the standard for Dionysiac festivities. The music they produced with their Phrygian pipes was powerful enough to endow the Dionysiac drum with ritual power. The oloi of the Coretes then are not merely musical instruments, but vehicles of ritual efficacy. By displaying themselves with these correct cultic instruments, the hymn singers take the first step in imitating the Coretes as they were at the moment of Zeus's birth. The same notion of religious music is conveyed in the refrain, which we have not yet analyzed. As Scofield observes, quite unusually for Celtic hymns, the refrain is repeated after every stanza. This has led many scholars to argue that the refrain expresses the hymn's main purpose, its prayer. While I don't dispute this, I suggest that one important aspect has been overlooked, the structural role of repetition. By repeating the refrain after each stanza, the hymn singers not only reinforce the supplication it contains, but also foreground the musical and rhythmic dimensions of the composition as a whole. It is not incidental, then, that the closing words of this refrain, after which the first and every subsequent stanza follows, are "Take pleasure in our song," kai gegati molpa. Although such a phrase is quite customary in Celtic hymns, it reveals that the singers are fully aware of the hymn's musicality, and they wish for it to be recognized and appreciated as such. Continuing the topic of repetition and its structuring force, we may turn to the remaining two lines of the first stanza, in which the singers state that they are standing at your well-fenced altar. Stantes aedomen theon amphibomon euerke. The descriptive phrase bomon euerke is, I believe, deliberately chosen. It is no accident that the altar of Zeus is called Euerke, and not, for instance, Kalos. This means that what matters here is not the beauty or stylistic elegance, whether of the altar or by extension of the hymn itself, but rather its soundness, orderliness, and protective function. In Homer, the adjective Euerkes is used to describe a well-defended court, especially in Odyssey, Book 17, and in Pindar it denotes safety in his fourth paean. From the very beginning of the hymn, and reiterated after every stanza through the refrain, the audience is consistently reminded that this performance is grounded in musical structure and ritual order. Some scholars have suggested that the phrase "Stantas aedomen theon amphibomon euerke," following immediately after the mention of musical instruments, may imply that the hymn singers dance around the altar. The reasoning is that there would be no need to state that they are standing if they were not moving before. Such interpretation would not be out of place, either within the conventions of hymnic performance or within the vibrant and well-attested tradition of dance in ancient Crete, which dates back at least to Homeric times. In the Iliad, Book 18, Homer alludes to this Cretan practice in his ekphrasis of Achilles' shield, where Daedalus is crafting a dancing floor, horos, for Ariadne at the palace of Knossos. According to Pausanias' 9th book, this dancing floor structure was later commemorated in a relief carved into white marble. If the central palace of Minoan elite featured a dancing floor, it is reasonable to expect that one would also see dancing in a cult sanctuary. If this is correct, then already in the very first stanza of the hymn, we are presented with a vivid ritual scene richly infused with both music and dance. Such a setting, I believe, functions as an important prelude to the following stanza, where the tale of the Curetes hiding Zeus is retold. The myth is generally recounted as follows. Zeus's mother, Rhea, gives birth, and, wishing to hide the newborn from her child-devouring husband, Kronos, entrusts her youngest son to the Curetes, mythological male figures clad in armor and shields, who used their weapons to make noise so that Kronos could not hear the infants weeping. Some ancient sources elaborate further, explaining that the Curetes did not merely make noise, but performed the dance in their armor, thus amplifying the sound. According to the late Hellenistic historian Diodorus of Sicily, this was known as the armed dance, Anoplius or Hesis, while Callimachus refers to it as prulus. So it would seem natural that in this stanza some form of dance would likely be referred to, and indeed it appears that it was. Unfortunately, the final line of the stanza is heavily corrupted, but scholars have proposed two possible reconstructions. According to Murray, the line ended with poda croantes epekrypson, while Wilamowitz suggested poda kuklantes epekrypson. In both cases, the word feet must be linked to a dance movement, whether croantes, beating, or kuklantes, circling with the feet. Although these are scholarly conjectures, they are strongly supported by the preceding stanza, which, as we have seen, already invokes a scene of music and dance. Yet if we consider the broader context of Cretan dance traditions, it becomes less and less conjectural to suggest that the hymn singers here are imitating the dance of the Curetes. The tradition of mimetic dances was strongly tied to the Cretan image. In his tale of Theseus, Plutarch recounts how the Athenian hero imitated the winding paths of the labyrinth. In a so-called crane dance. Likewise, in his geography, Strabo notes that in Crete, a sacred rite resembling the orgiastic dance of Dionysus was performed by men called Curetes, in which the myth of Zeus's birth was put forward. I quote, «Anoplion kinesin met Orpheus apodidontas prostesamenoi myton ton perites tu dios geneseos», executed movements in armor accompanied by dancing as they set forth the mythical story of the birth of Zeus. Thus, it seems that Strabo here intended to convey the idea that the myth was reenacted through dance rituals. Finally, a scholium on Pindor's second Pythian ode attests that this armor dance was a long-standing element of the Cretan tradition, one that spanned generations. I quote, «Now some say that the dance in armor was first invented and danced by the Curetes, and that later on Pyrrhichus the Cretan organized it again, and that Thaletas was the first to compose the hyporchemata, choral dance sounds for it, and Sosibius says all hyporchematic dances are called Cretan. Hence, we now come to the first major milestone of our analysis, a mimetic reenactment of the myth of the Curetes. The first mimetic action imitates the mythological dance of the shield-bearing Curetes and their concealment of the infant Zeus. Through this connection with a past event, the mimetic action, to borrow Burnet's words about Bacchylides, strives to activate a moment so numinous that some of its electricity could be tapped for the present ceremony. But to what end? What ritual is being performed here that requires this surge of mythical electricity? According to the anthropological reading of Jane Ellen Harrison, Palaikastro hymn singers assimilate themselves with the Curetes, addressing their god as the greatest Kouros among them as part of a ritual initiation into their society. By identifying with the mythological Curetes, the young boys enact the history of their island through the ritual performance of the hymn. For this reason, the hymn has sometimes been referred to as the hymn of the Curetes. At this point, we may return to the refrain and analyze it in its entirety. For a long time, it was believed that the refrain that in the refrain the address greatest kuros, megiste kure, refers to Zeus. This unusual address was soon connected to the now disputed hypothesis that in Crete, Zeus was worshipped as a young man rather than the Olympian bearded father from mainland iconography. The origins of this theory stem from the well-known myth of Zeus's birth on the island of Crete. Here, two important points need to be made. First, as Along suggests, the adjective megiste is not grammatically connected to the word kure, but instead stands alone as a traditional epithet of Zeus. This epithet also appears in 10th Olympian Ode of Pindar and a dedication to Zeus in Pergamon. As Brulé notes, the opening words of the hymn Io Megiste constitute an invocation of Zeus that syntactically separates Megiste from Kure. Furthermore, Along argues that the word Kure should not be capitalized as a title for the god, but should instead be linked with Zeus's father Kronos, Kroneia. What we are left with, then, is the expression, O greatest, son of Kronos, rather than, O greatest youth, son of Kronos. Second, the suggestion that the hymn singers will identify themselves with the mythological Kuretes is a strong claim that requires careful reconsideration. The very fact that the tale of the Kuretes is narrated, I believe, already introduces a degree of separation between the singers and the mythical persona. Later in the hymn, the singers ask Zeus to spring up in among cities, which implies that they are members of the polis, not participants of Zeus' actual Thiasos. What is more, the Kuretes are likely referred to in the refrain as the daimones who accompanied Agomenos, Zeus. But it is clear from lines 3 to 6 that Zeus has already come to earth, Ganthos bebekes daimonon Agomenos, and now only needs to be summoned to Dicte through song, dictan es enioton herpe. This is not to say that there is no interplay between the image of the Kuretes and the contemporary hymn singers, but this relationship must be understood as purely fictional. The hymn singers are members of the polis, petitioning aid on behalf of the city. They are not sanctuary priests living out the lives of the Kuretes, but worshippers who momentarily align themselves with the mythic figures in prayer. In other words, the first mimetic action is not intended as a rite of initiation or socialization for young citizens. The text does not support such a reading. Rather, this mimetic gesture is directed entirely towards the god. It is meant to please the god and thereby summon him to the sanctuary. Only once this divine presence has been ritually established can further pleas and claims be made. The existence of the second mimesis is almost unanimously accepted by scholars, so there is no need to go to similar lengths to establish its existence. In the final stanza, the singers most likely jumped together while singing the word tore. We can infer that this mimetic leap occurred based on the hymn's structure, the general mimetic tendencies of Celtic hymns, and particularly the Cretan ritual context. However, there is no scholarly consensus regarding what exactly the singers imitated in this action. Two prominent positions are worth exploring here. First, Degutis argues that the jump imitates the leap of Zeus Vilhanos, as he descends from a tree to fertilize the land. According to Degutis, a terracotta relief found in the ancient city of Marion, modern-day Cyprus, depicts this very event. In this relief, a young man is shown seated atop a palm tree, with multiple female figures positioned below, possibly representing the Thiasos of the deity. According to this reading, the hymn singers are inviting the god to leap down from the tree and bring fertility to the land. As intriguing as this hypothesis may appear, it ultimately lacks sufficient evidence to support it. One only know of the deity Velhanos, likely of Minoan origin, from a handful of inscriptions referencing the festival named Velhania, and from a few coins that may have depicted the god. Unfortunately, we know nothing beyond the name. What is very important is that there is no known myth connecting Velhanos with a leap that could link him to the hymn. It is therefore highly unlikely that the hymn singers are referring to Velhanos. What is more, Degutis' theory can be further challenged by an inscription from Eleuterna, Crete, which explicitly mentions both Zeus and Velhanos as distinct deities. It is far more likely that by the time of the hymn, the Velhanos had already been well subsumed into the cult of Zeus. Another interpretation was suggested by Martin West, who argues that the hymn relies on an image of Zeus
as the consort of Persephone, leaping up from Hades to the earth and bestowing fertility upon the land. This reading implies that the Cretan Zeus represented in the Palaikastro hymn is not merely a youth, as is usually believed, but Zeus Katachtonios, the chthonic infernal counterpart of the immortal pan-Hellenic Zeus. Although West presents a compelling narrative, a few objections can be raised against his theory as well. First, the chthonic Zeus is more commonly associated with divine judgment in the afterlife than with seasonal renewal. Second, while there is ample evidence for the cultic presence of Zeus Katachtonios, none of the sources cited by West, apart from the hymn itself, of course, mention the specific action of the god leaping upward from the underworld. In short, while Degutis provides an exact explanation for the action but invokes a questionable deity, West offers a plausible deity but lacks textual support for the action. It is difficult to support either of the theories with confidence, but for our purposes, I believe that we don't need to. In trying to understand the performance of the second mimetic action, the interpretations offered by West and Degutis do more to confuse than to aid us. Not only is it difficult, if not impossible, to determine with certainty which myth might be represented in this part of the hymn, but more importantly, I don't believe that such identification is the key to a successful reading. The attempt to pinpoint the correct god and the exact action being imitated rests on the assumption that both mimetic actions in the hymn are of the same kind, that is, that they both reenact a past mythical event in hopes of garnering its power. That is admittedly a quite natural assumption, since myth and ritual are often understood within a temporal framework that moves from past to present. As a result, ritual performances tend to be seen as inherently retrospective, or as Kowalczyk puts it, antique. Accordingly, the Palaikastro hymn as a whole is typically understood as an etiological hymn, one that aims to represent and imitate foundational events from the mythic past. This view, however, overlooks the productive power of ritual and festive performance, and it is precisely this productive aspect that connects all these different interpretations of the mimetic leap. In each case, the symbolic fertilizing power of Zeus being invoked stands as the ground for the choice of the epithet. It is important to note that the hymn articulates a wide range of pleas. The god is asked to secure prosperity not only in agriculture but also in maritime affairs, judicial order. Thus, we may easily expand this concept of fertility, as Pierre Brulé suggests, to the broader idea of ganos, the joy and well-being of the land with its people. Hence, the successful performance of the hymn equates to a thriving polis, which was likely depicted in the hymn's middle section, now unfortunately heavily corrupted. At this stage of the ritual, there is no longer an urgent need to correctly address or depict the god. He has already been summoned through the earlier mimetic act. Now what matters is that the correct requests are voiced and the appropriate ritual gestures are performed. The vitalizing aspect of the jump is reinforced by the meanings of the verb trosko, which refers not only to the physical act of leaping, but can also carry an erotic connotation of impregnation. The semantic ambiguity of the imperative Tore is consciously exploited by the hymn to construct an image of divine vitality, a god capable of recharging those aspects of society that are in need of revitalization. For this reason, I propose that we view the second mimetic action from a different perspective. It does not reenact a mythical event from the past, but rather invites Zeus himself to imitate the dancers and their distinctive movements. The action performed is not about the past, but about the future, making it prospective rather than retrospective. The imperative Tarekes is directed toward persuading the god, and by leaping themselves, the singers provide a clear model of what is to be done. If the god listens, he is expected to join the ritual and grant his worshippers a bountiful harvest, safe sailing in a just society. If my view is correct, then the entire hymn follows a meaningful structure. In the first stanza, the musicality of the hymn is acknowledged, and along with it, the correct cultic instruments of the kuretas are mentioned. In doing so, the singers already begin to liken themselves to the mythological kuretas. Following this, Zeus is invoked for the imitation of his past, the mythological episode of his birth and concealment from Kronos. With a proper invocation completed, the god is pleased. To delight him further, a eulogy of the past good life was likely recounted in the middle stanzas, of which we possess only fragments. Now that the god is fully satisfied and attentive, a plea begins. The god is asked to leap into the various domains of human life in order to bring a great prosperity and stability. At this point, a second mimetic action is performed, but in the opposite direction. Having already imitated a moment from Zeus's life, the singers now invite the god to imitate them. Throughout, the recurring refrain continually reminds us of the weight and significance that the actions carry. In this way, a complete hymnic prayer unfolds in location, eulogy, and plea. Thank you.
We have time for a question or two. Yes.
I really like this talk, and you may have alluded to this. I was listening to you and studying the text, but this is such a joyous kind of text. Was it? Is there? Have you given any thought to this? Was a kind of ritual where the entire population joined in? The way it says, spring up in our young citizens, spring up in noble order, it suggests that, at that point, everyone will be participating in this.
Oh, you mean that everyone present in the sanctuary
Yeah.
leaps together?
Yeah.
Yeah, that could have been that could have been a part of how the performance might have went, I think. But I think it's way more plausible to say that the hymn singers that definitely jumped together and leaped, whether everyone did it, likely.
Yeah. I'm just, it made me wonder how much sort of audience participation there is in these kind of rituals.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure. I think in Celtic hymns, when they are performed like this, I believe most of the time, at least from what we know, the hymn singers tend to do the mimetic actions and to sing and do whatever. I'm not sure if festivities where everyone joins in so joyously are attested. At least I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, of course, when you see Greek plays which have choral dancing and speaking, the audience is,
Sitting.
clearly sitting and observing this. But this is earlier, so, I don't know.
Well, that would be very interesting, yeah, I think. But it seems a little bit like, at least I would like to believe that the hymn singers, they do sort of try to imitate throughout the first part of the hymn, the kuretes, and that is a sort of to say a select number of people, or mythical figures. So I would believe that the hymn singers almost take on the role for the other citizens to convince the gods to leap into their city. So.
Right, yeah. Okay, thanks.
Yes, one more question.
I found your argument about two mimeses convincing, but I'm not sure about whether the argument that they're standing in line 9 implies that they have been moving beforehand. Couldn't it also be possible that it implies that they will soon move, that they will soon jump up?
Yeah, you could make the reverse argument.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Is that case?
It's Aeolic, it's not perfect, it's not Hypsipyle, it's Stantes.
Mm.
They must have
Sorry,
been
what?
moving before.
Because of the aorist. Okay. But
I didn't, what did you say?
It's Stantes, it's not Hypsipyle. So it's Aeolic, not perfect, so it's not that they are standing, it's that they're coming, they're stopping.
Oh, okay,
Mm.
right, okay.
All right, we must stop too. Our next speaker is Maggie Tighe. Maggie is a DPhil student at the University of Oxford, and she has worked on pastoral music in Ovid's Metamorphoses and also comic elements in Euripidean song. She's now writing a dissertation on songs in the fragments of Euripides. She'll speak today on songs of memory, identity and conflict in the music of Euripides' Hypsipyle. Maggie?
Okay, so hi everyone. I just want to say I'm delighted to be here and speaking to you all. I just wanted to quickly extend my thanks to the organisers for producing what has become a very wonderful conference and hosting us in a lovely city and these beautiful venues. So today I'll be particularly focusing on one of Euripides' fragmentary tragedies called Hypsipyle. So in his lifetime, Euripides wrote close to 90 plays. Today, we're fortunate to have 18 of them in their entirety, and while fragments of many others have reached us through various means. Through this partial legacy, we can grasp elements of the plots and characterization of a large number of Euripides' plays. Although a substantial portion of his writing has been lost, it hasn't completely vanished. But snippets and longer excerpts survive, including lines of dialogue and varying lengths of song, both choral and sung by actors. These surviving pieces, both lyric and trimeters, make up the largest body of poetic fragments we have from any classical poet. But ironically, despite this rich legacy, Euripides won the city Dionysia far less often than both Aeschylus and Sophocles. And yet, Euripides' posthumous influence has proved more enduring than his contemporaries. His tragedies were restaged, excerpted, and disseminated widely throughout the Hellenistic world, a practice that has likely contributed to the preservation of his work, given the number of copies that these would have needed. So of all the fragmentary plays that have survived in a fragmentary state, Hypsipyle has persevered as the most complete. The plot centers on Hypsipyle, as you may have guessed, who ruled as Queen of Lemnos when the Argonauts stopped on their journey. She fell pregnant by Jason and had twin sons after their encounter, who were raised by Jason and Orpheus. The women of Lemnos had previously massacred the men on the island, but Hypsipyle chose to hide and save her father. But when her betrayal was uncovered after the birth of her sons, she was sold as a slave to a couple in Nemea, Lycurgus and Eurydice. From what we have constructed of the play itself, Hypsipyle's sons arrive in Lemnos, seeking shelter, at the same time as the seven are coming through, where their mother is caring for the master's baby, Opheltes. Later in the play, Opheltes is killed in an accident, leading to the creation of the Nemean Games, and the family is later reunited. Hypsipyle comes quite late in Euripides' career, often dated between about 411 to 408, and also appears to be one of his longest, with at least 1,700 lines. And this tragedy has been placed in the thick of Euripides' interaction with new music. New music, for those who may not know, but I do believe many of you do, was a novel style of music composition that emerged in the second half of the 5th century. It was characterized by a novel, freer approach to musical composition and the relationship between libretto and score. The so-called new musicians were most often writers of dithyrambs, large circular dances associated with the worship of Dionysus. However, the tragedians Euripides and Agathon, whose works have unfortunately been lost, are consistently noted for their interaction with this style. In general, features of new music are associated with increasingly complex techniques, such as increased instrumental capacities, more complicated metrical structures, frequent modulation, and complicated syntax. Yet many of these virtuosic elements remain out of reach, accessible only through the veil of lyrics, apart from the exceptional case of the Orestes. In light of this, linguistic markers emerge as our most reliable guides. Particularly illuminating are moments of self-referentiality, when the performer touches on their own music or that of others, offering fleeting glimpses into the soundscapes that once accompanied the text. Still, as we shall soon observe, there are occasions where the music evoked in the lyrics doesn't necessarily align with the music as it may have been performed in reality. Despite these limitations, the surviving lyrics of Hypsipyle still resonate with the unmistakable features of new music. Today, I will turn our attention to Harmonidae, a solo song sung by Hypsipyle herself in the prologue, which extends into the Parlos. So, so we find Hypsipyle caring for Opheltes, her master's son, and she's singing to him. These are not Lemnian consolations of the weft and shuttle stretched on the loom, which the muse desires me to sing. But what is fitting for a tender young boy? To lull him or to sleep, or charm him or care for him. This is what I tunefully sing. You can immediately see how this song is steeped in language associated with music and performance. She begins by referring to her own childhood songs, the rhythmical weaving songs that she would have sung with fellow women throughout her life. Despite the muse calling Hypsipyle to this performance style, she explicitly states that she is singing a lullaby. Since the beginning of this monody has been lost, the meter can only be gleaned from about the 7th line onwards. However, the metrical composition of the surviving lines provides a structure I'd like to explore further. So, beginning with Idou kutupos hoda kotalon, look, here is the sound of castanets. Hypsipyle is addressing Opheltes directly in a line of iambic dimeter. In later Euripidean plays, these iambs were often used in the context of solo arias, such as this one. But in the next line, we see a shift. The next 4 lines all consist of dactylic tetrameter, 16 dactyls in a row. This move into dactyls happens exactly when Hypsipyle begins speaking about the Lemnian weaving songs of her childhood, imitating their repetition and rocking motions. The repetition of utada, these are not, further enforces this. It would have kind of come across as utada penas, utada kerkatos, his totanu paramuti alemnia. I also believe, just a quick note, that the contraction of the 2 shorts into penas instead of kerkados into one longer syllable really emphasizes what these are not and puts emphasis on Hypsipyle's pain and drives home how what she now sings are not the songs of her home. The description of her past life and the songs she used to sing closes with a line with a hini epis, the capital D. Sorry. So it's half a line of an epic line of dactylic hexameter, succinctly wrapping up the dactylic passage in line 13. When describing her past, which due to her relationship with the Argonauts is steeped in epic overtones, we move to dactyls, which most often evoke a martial energy and of course bring Homer to mind. However, their use is doubled as a form of mimeticism. The nearly unaltered dactylic tetrameter provides a repeated rhythmical pattern that would have been highly imitative of the weaving songs she is describing. What weaving songs and lullabies share, both deeply rooted in daily ritual, is their reliance on repetition. As working songs, they are marked by rhythm and routine, mirroring the steady movements of the body. If you think of any lullaby or laboring tune, its structure is likely simple and cyclical, often built around just an A and a B melody, returning again and again. In Hypsipyle, the meter, and likely the accompanying music, follows the drift of her memory, tracing the path of her thoughts as they return to a life from which she was violently torn. So the first line we are able to scan here, in line 6, is a fair Kratian. The dovetailed hoposethera. But then the final line is an ithophalic, adamoloidos ado. These are both Aeolic cola, an extremely fluid meter characteristic of Euripides' late innovative songs. Hypsipyle recalls the songs of her former life through dactylic rhythms, evoking the cadence of a world that's now lost to her. Yet as she emerges from this at the end, she returns to Aeolic cola to conclude, Tada meloidos ado, these are the songs I tunefully sing. The closing ithophalic line underscores the poignant force of the tada, standing in sharp contrast to the preceding lines shaped by the dactylic memory. Such distinctive shifts in the meter were likely followed by her performed music, creating an almost mimetic musical theme following the lyrics when she either sings of her past or present. Hypsipyle's performance draws on the mimetic, programmatic style of late Euripidean new music, songs that carried the audience along and reflected the performer's thoughts and emotions. Focusing in on line 10 in particular, histotonu is a compound of histos, meaning loom or web, and tonos, tension. Tonos can be used in the context of weaving for stretching and tightening. However, this is also a prevalent term for speaking about music. It has several musical applications: the pitch of a noise or a voice, an accent of a word, a measure or meter, or even to indicate keys or mode. This choice of words provides an intricate weaving of both the language that Hypsipyle sings and the act most associated with women in the household, weaving. Hypsipyle is word painting while singing a highly mimetic monody, creating this amazingly detailed and emotional song. So using some basic pitch accent analysis, and I do have to thank Tira in particular for her help, we can see a potential musical shape. We have possibly 3 peaks in as many words. Although the meter may have become more regular, its melody is still quite varied. This is likely a reflection of the fluid melodies often associated with new musical tragedies and their songs. Although Hypsipyle herself is often established in a very regular meter, the dactylic tetrameter, When singing of her previous life, the melodic contours appear to be fluid and varied, contrasting the strict rhythm. Overall, we're getting the impression that Hypsipyle's lullaby is a much more musically complex song than what one would usually expect, juxtaposing the performed music with the described self-referential elements of the song. Returning to line 8 of the monody, Hypsipyle mentions crotala, an instrument similar to castanets. Crotala are traditionally an instrument associated with Dionysiac ritual. In the context of worship, it was often performed alongside other instruments, such as auloi and tympana, to create a chaotic, overwhelming performance. The music of Bacchic revelry and its influence has been established in the development of new music, and the presence of this instrument, likely even used as a prop on stage, invites implications that are far from trivial. Euripides makes clear his deliberate engagement with new music as a defining feature of this work. Clearly, this reference to new music and its Dionysiac origins, as seen in the music of Hypsipyle, was not ignored by his contemporaries. In Aristophanes' Frogs, after Euripides mocks Aeschylus' style of composition, Aeschylus responds by bringing out Euripides' muse. He dismisses the lyre, saying it's not needed, as she will play the crotala. It is this muse from Lesbos that Aeschylus deems the archetypal example of Euripides' innovative performances, a woman from a foreign land performing with a percussion instrument. As a result, this muse in Frogs has most often been accepted as a caricature of Euripides' Hypsipyle. If we consider Aristophanes' parody as a heightened reflection of Euripides' dramatic style, it reveals the hallmark traits of his late performance practice, traits that resonate clearly in Hypsipyle's own song. Aeschylus continues his parody by mocking Euripides' characteristic use of extended melisma, lingering dramatically on a single syllable. He does so twice, seizing upon the verb elisso, to wind, and stretching its first syllable into an exaggerated wail, coiling the sound just as the word itself suggests. On this topic of melisma, I would like to focus on the closing 2 lines of Hypsipyle's opening monody. They both end in an omega with a circumflex. Those who have researched the relationship between pitch accent and notation have noticed increased melisma on syllables with a circumflex. In this case, we essentially have 2 lines ending in a long syllable, which also happen to rhyme. And this just struck me as an ideal placement for the extended melisma that Euripides became known for in his late career. And since we already know that this tragedy took advantage of numerous stereotypical features of new music, I doubt this one was overlooked. So it's the music of this play that has most significantly coloured its reception. If Hypsipyle had survived in full, I believe we have had access to a wealth of late new musical songs that would have contributed significantly to our understanding of this stage of Euripides' career. However, we are left with only brief glimpses into how innovative, programmatic, and introspective the music of this tragedy was. It's clear that Hypsipyle epitomized Euripides' interaction with this style. Euripides capitalizes on the established presence of new music in Hypsipyle's song to construct and convey her character. As the song unfolds, we're beginning to see how Hypsipyle will control and weave this narrative as she sees fit. However, although Hypsipyle is musically weaving her own story, she cannot return to the weaving songs of her homeland. The chorus of local Nemean women arrive and begin to sing the parados. This parados is to be an amoibion, a sung exchange between the chorus and Hypsipyle. The chorus is concerned at the fact that she is singing about her past again. Furthermore, they ask what she's been doing by listing some typical tasks, but we know from watching her, she's done none of what they suggest. In their opening strophe, the chorus specifically highlights the fact that Hypsipyle is not only unaware of her immediate surroundings, but is also unconcerned with her expected duties as a slave. Why are you at the doorway, my friend, either sweeping the entrance or throwing water on the floor as a slave does? Are you singing of the Argo, that 50-oared vessel which your voice is constantly praising, or the sacred golden fleece, which around the boughs of the tree the eye of the dragon keeps watch? The audience is being provided with an insight to the world beyond Hypsipyle. The chorus is excited. The 7 are passing through Nemea on their way to Thebes. The chorus is inviting Hypsipyle to join them and watch the soldiers. They intend to partake in a higher register of poetry, an epic tekescopia, a viewing from the walls. recalling Helen's own Techoscopia in Iliad 3 as she watched the war unfold from the walls of Troy. To briefly return to Hypsipyle's monody, we just heard that the muse is urging her to return to the Lemnian weaving songs. But instead, she is forced to sing a lullaby to her master's child. Now, the chorus are coaxing her to leave her singing in favor of an epic topos, the arrival of the Argive soldiers. In addition to this, the women of the chorus highlight that singing of the Argo is an established theme of Hypsipyle's. They ask, in what seems to me a frustrated or tired tone, "Are you singing of the Argo again?" Which really emphasizes that it is neither her first time singing about this topic, nor being consoled by the chorus in this way. The chorus is using music as a method of consolation and distraction, really highlighting its emotional power. But Hypsipyle responds to the chorus's consolations, but she goes on to describe the Argo rowing through the Thracian Sea in emotive detail. She imagines both the rowers' strokes and the music that would have accompanied them. Rowing songs are yet another form of work song, just like the previously addressed weaving songs and lullabies, which all abided by simple melodies and repetitive rhythms. Similarly to harmony, we see a distinct shift in meter when we are carried from a broader description of the Thracian Sea to focus in on the sound of the Argo. The crying out of the Thracian Cythera shifts us into hemi-epis once again, which is line 10 and 11, these two in bold. It appears to be a metrical leitmotif. Whenever Hypsipyle singing zooms in on her previous life, the weaving songs of her monody and the rowing songs in her response to the chorus, the meter takes on distinctly epic overtones. Despite the chorus trying to distract her, Hypsipyle finds her own music more comforting and chooses to remain in that world. She rejects the chorus's offer and closes her response with, "These things my heart, my soul yearns to see, but as for the Danaan's labors, let someone else lament them." Hypsipyle has no interest in the present world or even her present situation, and instead wishes to focus on the memories of a happier time. By specifically invoking someone else to take on the current topic, she monopolizes the topic of the Argo as her own. Not only does Hypsipyle choose not to join them, but she also chooses not to lament the Argive soldiers. She will not join their song. Hypsipyle is in a state of powerlessness, which she can only express through her own lamentation. Hypsipyle's song, and especially the topos of her song, is the only part of her life she still has control over, and she exerts this control over the chorus. She concludes her exchange with, "But my suffering, which lament or melody or lyre's music, lamenting with my tears, with Calliope's aid, will come to mourn my pain." We have been exposed to huge generic hybridity, having traveled the world of work songs with lullabies, weaving songs, and rowing songs, as well as epic, trying to overcome Hypsipyle's stubborn, high tragic monody. Finally, the Lemnian queen has turned to Calliope to inform her of what type of song to sing. Having explored so many genres between her monody and the parados, she still has not found one that will suitably accompany her lamentation. Hypsipyle's identity is complex, torn between her previous status as queen and her current role as maidservant, and the complication of her song really reflects this. There's a striking parallel in this tragedy's parados to one of Euripides' extant plays in Electra. The chorus similarly approaches Electra and asks her to join their dancing and festivities, but she rejects them. "I will not take my place in a chorus together with the wives of Argos and stamp my whirling feet." Naomi Weiss has argued for the demarcation of Electra from the chorus, that her chorea is separate and part of a different genre entirely. Electra's separation from the chorus and its significance in her representation can be similarly seen in the characterization of Hypsipyle. The former queen is still mentally tied to her previous life, and through her songs we see how she has completely detached herself from her current status. She refuses to join in with the local festivities, just like Electra. Electra's preoccupation with lamentation defines her character, while Hypsipyle's obsession with her previous epic past also informs the music she will perform. Euripides is using features of new music, namely self-referentiality, to provide an added layer of nuance to the characterization of these eponymous heroines, to emphasize their mindset, attitude to their surroundings, and what is integral to so many tragedies, their relationship to their respective choruses. So we are introduced to the musicae of Hypsipyle via her opening monody. Although it is ostensibly a lullaby, looking beyond the surface reveals a wealth of nuance. The metre of the song shifts from the fluidity of Aeolic to dactylic regularity as we trace her thoughts from the past to the present. The present to the past. This shift in metre was most likely followed by the melody of Hypsipyle's song and the accompaniment. Utilizing the music, Hypsipyle undermines the explicit self-referentiality present in this song. Instead, we travel through numerous genres, which would have been an additional aural journey for a contemporary audience. In a short space of time, we cover huge generic ground: lullabies, weaving songs, rowing songs, tragic lyric, and epic. This is expanded further by the chorus. Not only does the opening composition of Hypsipyle highlight many of the key features associated with new music, emphasized by Hypsipyle's role as Euripides' muse in Aristophanes' Frogs, Euripides also utilizes music to highlight Hypsipyle's desperate attempt to regain control. The amoibion performed by the chorus and Hypsipyle further define her characterization and her mental preoccupation with her past life through music. The tension caused by her refusal to sing anything but her own music underscores her inability to relinquish her royal past. Euripides uses music as a powerful tool to represent Hypsipyle's attempt to regain agency and any semblance of power in her new life. Thank you.
Thank you, Maggie. Questions?
When you say epic, would you include Decichoros as epic?
Which?
Decichoros. The passage you characterize as epic. To me, it strikes a bit as Decichorian rather than Homeric. Would you include Decichoros in your concept of epic, or would this be something different?
I'm not sure. Do you mean C chorus?
Decichoros.
Oh, Decichoros. Sorry. I actually haven't looked at Decichoros in particular detail, so I might actually go back because I'm mainly going off the kind of generalized Argonaut myth. But I definitely go back and have a look at Decichoros in more detail. Thank you.
No, I don't think we have much on the Argo.
Yeah.
It's Pasi Melusa anyway.
Thank you so much. Very interesting presentation of the Hypsipyle. You argued in the lullaby that on the one hand the weaving symbolism is typically female, and on the other hand the dactylic sequence typically epic. Do you think this might be evoking Helen, who in the Iliad weaves a tapestry of the narrative of the Trojan War, or is that far-fetched? But seeing as you saw a reference to the taikoscopy in the paradox, maybe that's something to investigate?
Yeah, that's a really interesting comparison, I think, particularly because Helen does both. She weaves and participates in a tachyscopia, whereas Hypsipyle is doing neither and is very stubborn about that. So that's a really interesting comparison. So I can definitely look into that. Thank you.
One more question. Sorry, I saw her first.
Sorry.
Thank you so much. I have a question. This was amazing. I have a question about the melisma. That in the Aristophanes. I just remember all of the A's.
Yes.
Yeah, Aeolicite. I noticed that in one of the other passages, I wrote it down, the 752, the Paradise chorus.
Yes.
There's halison.
Yes.
And I mean, it's the same. Yeah. So I was wondering, and I mean, it was in bold, so I noticed it, and I was wondering, would there be consistently melismas on specific words in order to highlight? Or do you think it's just in the context of how Aristophanes was parodying? Like, do you think Helison might have also had?
I think in this example it would have been difficult because it's smack bang in the middle of the line.
Yeah.
The difference between that and Aristophanes is that it's put right at the beginning, so he kind of has more room, and which is the same thing what I said about the two omegas, they're at the end, so he kind of has space to drag it on if he wants to. I did a version of this a few months ago, and someone pointed out in the Electra passage that although although it's not the same verb, we have the same opening syllable. And again, that could be a place where you could put it, because again, it's just at the beginning. You have a little bit more room to play at the beginning or the end, but I think where it is in the chorus, the song is just a bit awkward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Marsha, we do have time.
Oh, okay. When I was listening to the her invoking weaving and this epic, he asked about Helen. I was thinking about Penelope at home with this. They're all suffering from, as epics do, from this nostoi, this nostos, longing to go home. And in Penelope's case, in Hypsipyle's case, she's longing to go home too. So is Odysseus. In Penelope's case, with the weaving, she is longing for someone to come home. So it all gets wrapped up together in this, and her refusal to participate, using the hexameter language of epic, but refusing to participate with the chorus, is this sort of creates a tension between this epic longing and yet refusal to really talk further about it in a way, which is anti-epic.
Yeah, I think Penelope is another really good example, so a good contrast, because again, Penelope is using weaving to maintain her power over the suitors, and it's the only way she can do so, whereas for Hypsipyle, all she wants to do is that. So I'm sure Penelope wants to escape, Hypsipyle wants to go back. So again, it's the same as Helen, where she's kind of in a situation where she's wishing for the opposite as both Helen and Penelope in these big Homeric epics, despite her also wishing to be in epic. But thank you.
Thank you so much. The next speaker is Mattis Heyne. Mattis just very recently defended his thesis on the ancient reception of Sappho and Alceste. Congratulations, Mattis.
Thank you.
And he is now a postdoctoral research assistant at the Goethe University in Frankfurt. He'll speak for us today on Dulci laborem decipitur sono, the role of Orpheus in Aeolic poetology. Mattis?
Good morning. Many thanks to the organizers, Ms. Trolavichute, Ms. Unite, Mr. Notari, and especially Dr. Chavela, as well as to the scientific committee for accepting my paper. You should all have a handout in a moment. On it you will find a table of contents which will guide you through my talk. I will be flitting through a number of texts. My most important claims are, first, that Horace's connection of Sappho and Alcais with Orpheus-related imagery is meant to display a lesbian, poetic, and musical genealogy. And second, that there are traces of similar genealogies in earlier literature predating Horace. Regarding the mythological figure of the musician and poet Orpheus, the most iconic element of his myth is certainly his katabasis, his journey to the underworld and his use of music to win back his beloved Eurydice. This story, first known from Plato and alluded to in Euripides' Alcestis, is particularly well known to us through Virgil's depiction in his Georgics, in an especially important place within his poem right before the end. Virgil's version of the Orphic katabasis became popular already during his lifetime, as can be seen from the fact that Horace alludes to it several times in the first published collection of his odes. In each case, the poetic interests of the Horatian lyric I play a major role. These interests are connected with allusions to Virgil's Orpheus katabasis, connections which I will outline now. Horace's Ode to 13 begins with the cursing of a tree which almost fell on his head and killed him. This near-death experience leads him to contemplate what he would have seen in the underworld, quam paene vidimus, lines 1 to 2 there on the handout, text 1. One event he almost witnessed is a divine musical performance. This music calms all the beasts and sinners of Hades, particularly the monster Cerberus and the vicious Eumenides, which I highlighted in bold.
As commentators have long seen, their descriptions include clear allusions to Virgil's Georgics. In both Virgil and Horace, the beast's reaction to the music is described with the words stupere, and both descriptions contain queen sentences. Compare text 2. Horace's clearest borrowing is the Eumenides' snake hair. His Intorti capillis eumenidum recreantur anguis in 34-5 echo Virgil's Implexae crinibus anguis Eumenides. There is one notable difference, though. The divine music which Horace hears in his hypothetical katabasis is actually not Orpheus's at all, but that of his poetic models, Sappho and Alcaeus. The consequence for our interpretation is clear. Horace imbues the lesbian poets with the poetic powers of Orpheus. There is a debate on whether this pertains only to Alcaeus or to Sappho as well, but the general consequence of such a transfer has not been doubted as far as I know. The second instance in which Horace imitates Virgil's Orphic katabasis occurs in Carmen 3:11, text 3. This long and multifaceted poem, wooing a girl called Lydie, refers to multiple mythical figures in its separate episodes. It begins with an address to Hermes and then to the lyre, the musical instrument. Horace seemingly lists a number of exploits of the instrument. For example, he notes its powers to calm animals and move forests. Furthermore, Horace narrates how the lyre once persuaded Kerberos to let down his guard. This can only indicate Orpheus and his katabasis, and once again there are lexical features which the episode in Horace's lyric poem has in common with Virgil's Epilion, as can be seen in texts 2 and 3 on your handout, and on the continuation of text 2, which I only printed in the slide. The most salient commonalities are the following. First, the specific choice of the tiger, tigris, as the wild animal to be calmed by Orpheus's lyre, as well as the moving of trees, which is present in both this text and in which I highlighted down there in Comites Silvas in 13. Second, the passages in the Georgics and in Horace's Carmen 3:11 both name specific entities in the underworld, Kerberos and Ixion, as well as the snakes, who are in Virgil the hair of the Eumenides, as we've seen, but who are on Cerberus's head in Carmen 3:11. Muniant anguis in 1780. Just like in Carmen 2:13, Horace displays this mythical narrative in 3:11 with regard to his own poetic program. Thus, Horace uses imagery taken from his literary models in order to embellish the situation, while the description of the love interest Lydie, especially in the third strophe, uses anacreontic imagery. The address to the lyre itself has been recognized as alluding to Sappho, just as he calls the instrument loquax testudo in line 5. Sappho calls it ponaessa in fragment 118 neri. This was specifically highlighted as a Sapphic allusion by the most recent commentator of the Horatian Ode, Tony Woodman, in his Green and Yellow commentary. Just like in Carmen 2:13, Horace displays this mythical narrative. Oh, sorry, yeah, I already read that. Thus, Horace connects his lesbian models with the Orpheus myth, as can be seen both in Carmen 2:13 and in Carmen 3:11. This realization immediately sparked further questions for me. First, do these connections have wider implications for the general reception of the lesbian poets? And what does Orpheus have to do with Sappho? Interestingly, if you follow Orpheus's biographical myth to its conclusion, you will find that some versions make a connection with Lesbos, the native island of Sappho and Alcaeus. Virgil's own Orpheus narrative mentions that after his unsuccessful katabasis, Eurydice, Orpheus is killed and dismembered. His head, however, as seen on this vase, keeps on singing, even after being thrown in the river Hebros. This is text 5 on your handout. This is where Virgil leaves Orpheus, but others like Ovid continue and mention that his head floats onward to the island of Lesbos. Why Lesbos? This is made most clear by the Hellenistic elegist Phanocles, preserved in Stabius, particularly verses 21-2 in text 6 on your handout. Keinu molpai tegai merte kitaristus ne son eke passion destina oidotate. Thence the island is filled with musical performances and lovely kithra playing, and it is the most tuneful of all. This explicit credit of a transfer of musical and poetic power from Orpheus to Lesbos is attested not just in Phanocles. It is mentioned in such diverse sources as Aelius Aristides, Hyginus, Himerius, Proclus, and some more recent scholia to Aeschylus. I have included all these references, these instances, as texts 7 to 11 on your handouts just for reference. I will not discuss them here. Despite this wide distribution of the attribution of Orphic powers to Lesbos, it is important to note that this does not automatically affect the reception of the lesbian poets Sappho and Alcaeus. In fact, we cannot deduce from this fact a direct connection between Orpheus and Sappho. We must keep in mind that we have no evidence that Orpheus was ever mentioned in the poetry of Sappho or Alcaeus. He first enters archaic Greek literature in Simonides and Ibycus. Nevertheless, the existence of such a tradition of poetic transfer does have further implications on Horace's lesbian reception, and his mentions of Orpheus. Since Virgil's and Ovid's version of the Orpheus myth so closely overlap with Phanocles', who spells out this transfer, we can assume that Horace knew this tradition. And we can understand from his imitation of Virgil's Catabasis in Carmen 213 that he meant to imply that Sappho and Alcaeus' poetry is genealogically related to that of Orpheus. For the discussion, I would be interested whether these hypotheses which I have presented so far seem outlandish to you or not. For me, the individual steps in the chain of reasoning are minute. Nevertheless, there is a caveat that cannot be underestimated. No single source names Orpheus and Sappho or Alcaeus together in such a genealogical relationship, save the aforementioned Scholia Recentiora on Aeschylus text 11 on the handout, but that is very late, maybe even not ancient. The other sources mentioning a transfer of poetic power to the island of Lesbos always stop short of explaining why Lesbos supposedly was the most tuneful island, or if this has anything to do with Sappho and Alcaeus, even though to us this might sound rather obvious. Hence, nowhere in antiquity can we read explicitly that Sappho sprang out of some kind of poetic tradition that could be traced back to Orpheus or his head. This would have to be still proven. In lieu of such instances, however, there are several remarkable co-occurrences of Sapphic and Orphic imagery that predate Horace, which seem to me to strengthen such an interpretation of Horace's depiction of them. Today, I only have the time to discuss one of them in detail, which I would like to do now. This is the lyric fragment preserved on the Cologne Sappho papyrus, text 12 on your handout, right after line 12 of the Old Age poem, which is now known as Sappho fragment 58c Neri. This poem is still understudied. While there are a number of articles that discuss it, there is not even a more recent critical edition than that of Obink, 2009, in a collected volume on the Cologne Sappho. This is where I will present it in a few more words. In the 13 lines between the end of the Old Age poem, which we've seen here, the end of the Old Age poem and the lower margin of the extant fragment, we possess a text in poetic diction, of which about the right half of the column is missing. So far, it resists any coherent metrical analysis, despite several attempts. The first two words, decipitur, probably make up 8 short syllables, followed by 4 long syllables, myton aut urg. This might either be anapistic or dochniac, but the rest of the other readable lines contain sequences that fit neither of these meters. The topic contained in the song range from a lyric eye accusing a deceptive boy, Dolly Pi, to the light of the stars, line 6, Faus Asteron, and then to Orpheus. The singer is mentioned with his patronymic, line 9, Gru Koron Orper, which is to be supplemented to Oiagru Koron Orper, the son of Vidiagras, and with his power to charm all animals through his resounding lyre, line 10, Herpeta Panta, and line 12, Euptongon Lyran. As we've seen, the meter, which I described, is not fitting for Sappho, and the dialect as well, so no one, basically, except for Tsantsanoglu, believes that this might be by Sappho. But what does this have to do with Sappho and her perception, and how does it connect her to Orpheus? Firstly, the poem is preserved on a papyrus next to two songs which were certainly by Sappho. The script is a different one in this poem from that in which the Sappho poems are written. This might indicate that someone took a roll already containing some poems by Sappho and added something else. The writer would certainly have placed the poem in the context of Sappho's reception. In fact, while the two scripts are probably contemporaneous, John London argued that the anonymous lyric poem was an autograph judging by the large-scale corrections. You see there's a lot of stuff crossed out. Secondly, the initial phrase of the lyric poem, Psiturop dolie, echoes Sapphic turns of phrase. Doloploke, as used of Aphrodite in Sappho 1 verse 2, nearly text 13, and Mytoploke, used of Eros according to Maximus of Tyre, which is Sappho fragment 188, nearly text 14. The long sequence of epithets itself further echoes the hymnic style of Sappho's hymn to Aphrodite. Hence we now know about the Cologne lyric poem that A, it was connected to Sappho's reception, and B, it had to do with Orpheus. Sadly, the fragmentary state of the poem does not tell us what part of Orpheus's myth was narrated. The mention of fiery sun lighted the stars, lines 6 to 7, are very generic. Giovan Battista d'Alessio recently suggested an ingenious reading in line 7 to 8, where we have pas acuo. He suggested dias pas acuo, which would mean I hear he was torn apart. Dias pasai, the subject accusative of this accusative with infinitive construction, would be oiagru koron orpea. We would then have a reference to the myth of Orpheus's severed head, as I just described it. However, the main problem of this reading is that a dicolon is separating the accusative from the infinitive, and we do expect a syntactic break at the dicolon, especially due to the notable metric and syntactic parallel of acuo in verse 8 with aperpo in verse 3, where there's in both places a dicolon. Instead, I fear that although the myth of Orpheus's head would fit well in this Sappho papyrus, the extant phrases rather suggest a generic celebration of the singer's power, maybe allowing for a mention of the katabasis. How can we make progress on understanding the text then? I argue that there is one feature that can lead us to identifying parallels, which in turn might prompt better readings. In his 2006 article, Richard Rawls suggested that the identity of the boy addressed in the beginning might be Hermes rather than Eros. He correctly noted that none of the epithets is per se of an erotic nature. In fact, the Editores Principes already pointed out that Hermes receives the epithet psituristes in Pseudo-Demosthenes' speech against Nero, and that he is addressed as dolios in Aristophanes' Women at the Thesmophoria. This does not preclude the Sapphic allusions we've recognized in Psiturop dolie, while Sappho's Doloploke and Mytoploke, cited above, are connected to different gods in Sappho. Note that Sappho does address Hermes in several poems, as the claimant points out. Meanwhile, Rawls noted that there would be an obvious function for the address to Hermes in the Cologne lyric poem, the myth of Hermes' invention of the lyre, which we heard about yesterday. With this background, it would be natural to address Hermes in a song featuring Orpheus, creating a kind of poetic genealogy from divine to semi-divine musician, possibly continuing with the poem's lyric I. This leads me to a point that, as far as I know, has not been mentioned. If we are looking for comparanda for the Hermes hymns that have to do with Orpheus, Horace's Ode 311 comes to mind. I already discussed this ode as one of the Horatian poems, which clearly allude to Orpheus in general and to Virgil's narrative of his katabasis in particular. We remember that his power to calm tigers was mentioned. While this cannot be called an echo of the herpeta panta in the Orpheus, the lyric poem, line 10, it's certainly a parallel display of Orpheus's musical powers. If the Cologne lyric poem progressed in a somewhat similar way as Horace Carmen 311, the words Psiturop dolie as far as Epipoulepai would be a hymnic address to Hermes, Hetaira Ferpo would be the first indication of the situation of the lyric I, corresponding to Horace's description of his woes with Lyde. The word apnus, dead, might, as Rawls suggested, be said of a tortoise, which had to be killed to make the lyre, a common topos, as we heard from Professor Betta yesterday. Lines 6 to 10 would then refer to Orpheus and his deeds, maybe his katabasis, maybe going down from leaving the light of the stars. It was suggested, Aeolic, apnus prolipoimi, but perhaps also the light of the stars has to do with what he doesn't see anymore if he goes into the underworld. Then finally, there would be a transition from Orpheus's lyre to the instrument of the female lyric I, ekoisa, in line 13. Just as Horace prays for the lyre to now tell him how to solve his problems, in his case, win over Lydie, the Cologne lyric poem might contain the wish of the female speaker to solve hers. Perhaps she, too, is an unhappy lover like Sappho and like the lamenting girl in the so-called Fragmentum Grenfelianum, with which this poem has often been compared. I am aware that this outline of how the mysterious Cologne fragment might have looked like is very hypothetical. Nevertheless, I think that the comparison with Horace's ode is worthwhile. Even if the structure of the Cologne lyric poem remains unclear, the relevance of Orpheus as a poetic predecessor for the speaker of that poem is quite probable, and this provides a plausible indication for the greater age of the poetic genealogy between Orpheus and Sappho. Why is such a poetic genealogy interesting or important then? And more specifically, why is it interesting for this conference about connections between music memory and identity in Greek and Roman antiquity? Because, as I would like to argue, the musical rather than simply poetic aspect of the connection between Orpheus and Sappho is what legitimizes her position, Sappho's, as one of Horace's most important models. And this legitimization is a point of particular importance to me, which was sparked during my work on my doctoral thesis not too long ago. And I reckon still today there are scholars who claim that Sappho is simply not as important for Horace as Alcaeus. Apparently, a woman is just not a good enough model for a Roman Vates. Such view has been thoroughly refuted by 2002, but there is still more to be added to Woodman's argument. Musical terminology, for example, is very important for Horace. See, for example, an article from 2013 by our latest speaker, Camila Wiswucha. Horace uses expression like the lesbian plectrum to describe his own poetic mode. Given this, information stemming from the traditional biographies of the lyric models, which he certainly uses, bolsters his credentials as a Roman lyricos vates. And while it is a general feature of biographical traditions of lyric poets that they are credited with inventions, see the monograph by Marit Kivillo, it is not too common for them to be called inventors of musical instruments and modes. It is, however, it is much more common that they are, for example, supposed to have invented meters. Sappho, however, is called the inventor of the Mixolydian mode by Aristophanes, inventor of the Pactis, according to also Aristophanes, as well as the peripatetic Menikmus of Sicyon, and inventor of the plectrum, according to her entry in the Pseudo. And another traditional musical inventor besides Sappho is, of course, Orpheus. I would particularly like to draw your attention, just very shortly, to the Timotheus's poetic genealogy in text 15 on your handout. Despite his new musical individualism, he follows in the footsteps of previous inventors, the first of which is none other than our Thracian singer who invented the Kelus. Between Orpheus and himself, he mentions only one other figure, Terpander, who supposedly added strings to the Cythera. It is notable that Terpander's lesbian birth is strongly emphasized here. Are we to think of the transferal of Orpheus's head to Lesbos again? Felix Budemann certainly suggests so. And last but not least, it is well known that Sappho is called the 10th muse, not by Plato, since the epigram bearing this attribution is certainly pseudepigraphic, but at least from the late Hellenistic period, and certainly in Catullus, who calls a colleague's girlfriend Sappica Buella Musa Doctior in text 16, as was pointed out by Tony Woodman in the aforementioned article. While Horace does not mention this, the Sappho as a muse, he certainly must have known it, as one could argue from his similar move in Carmen 1:1, where he himself, a posteriori, adds himself to the canon of 9 lyric poets, or makes Mykolas add him as the 10th. Orpheus, in turn, is, of course, descended from a muse. All these reasons may not convince a skeptic who would deny that there was a major tradition connecting Orpheus and Sappho, or that Horace knew or invented such a tradition, but it certainly contextualizes their connections in the Cologne Papyrus and in Horace's Odes 213 and 311, and strengthens the idea that Sappho was a musical innovator who was worth imitating as a main model. Thank you for your attention.
Tapanda came in pretty late in your talk, but wouldn't be Tapanda the natural follower of Orpheus in that whole genealogy, as in Nicomachus, for instance? And would Sappho even be regarded as being in the same kind of poetry as Orpheus? Wouldn't Tapanda or even Alcman being closer to that line?
I mean, yes, for Timotheus, certainly. For Timotheus, he doesn't mention Sappho. One, who knows why? Maybe because he regarded her not as in the same kind of poetic tradition. But I argue that later poets, maybe not already in the 4th century, but from the Hellenistic period onward, as in this Cologne fragment and in Horace, certainly do regard her as being part of this same thing. Maybe it just took some time to add her to the canon, maybe it just took some time to add her into this tradition of Orpheus as a lesbian progenitor, which is on the lyre in the 5th century already. So yes, I agree with you that there's this discrepancy, but I think it's solved by the passage of time. That by Horace's time, this is certainly the case. And Horace doesn't mention Terpander, as far as I know. For him, Terpander is not important as a follower of Orpheus, while Orpheus is very important and named several times.
Another question? Well, if I could then very briefly, can you squeeze Ovid into here some? I know he's, of course, he's such this wonderful pastiche of Virgil.
Mm-hmm.
Is he also looking back to Virgil and that tradition of Orpheus in any of this?
To Virgil, he's certainly looking
Yes,
back.
Virgil,
This is very well documented. And of course, Ovid is interested in Sappho as elegiac lover as well, as a first very important female lover. But I can't really fit her into his version in the Metamorphoses. It would be an interesting thing whether there are any connections in the Epistula Sappho's, but that, of course, is also debated on whether it's by Ovid or not. But I think, on that note, that she is included in the catalogue of his letters in the Tristia, I think, makes it very clear that the letter is by him, if it's mentioned there. Or at least, I mean, some people have argued that the letter we have is not the letter by him that definitely was on Sappho, and so there might be some connection there. And if someone could argue that there are, for example, repetitions between that episode and the Orpheus episode in the Metamorphoses, that would be an avenue to go into. So that I could look into. Thank you.
Thank you. Our final speaker this morning will be Marsha McCoy. Marsha teaches at Southern Methodist University and has taught at numerous other places as well. She's received a number of honors, including a Fulbright Fellowship and a Mellon Fellowship, and she's been finalist a number of times for the North American highest prize in teaching. She'll be speaking for us today on something she's been working on for some time, the Gallic Carnyx, Music, Memory, and Identity in Pre-Roman Gaul. Marsha.
Okay, well, like the other speakers, I want to thank the organizers of this wonderful conference. I've met so many great people, and of course, Vilnius and Lithuania are just beautiful. So thank you for organizing the conference. Thank you for accepting my paper. I'm very honored to be here.
So the Gallic or Celtic Carnyx is a type of trumpet held and played vertically with the bell curved to horizontal position and shaped in the form of a boar's head or serpent head. It was played in war to unite the Gallic troops, to intimidate the enemy with its loud, blaring sound, which was quite piercing due to its height, and to frighten opponents with its large, wild, animal head visage. Sorry, how do I get the had up. It's over on the right, but it's not showing up. Let me see. Oh, there it is. Okay. Oh, okay. Got it. All right. Set it. Okay. As one way of understanding the importance of the Carnyx to Gallic culture, and also because of the surfeit of evidence from the Roman side, this paper first explores the extraordinarily prominent place given to the Carnyx in representations of Gauls by the Romans. This evidence reveals the importance of the Carnyx not only to the Gauls, but also to the Roman othering and mythologizing of the Gauls in order to shape and strengthen the Romans' own national identity. The paper then situates new archaeological discoveries of the Carnyx in the art and burial deposits of the Gauls themselves in order to analyze the Carnyx's importance in the military, social, and religious culture of the Gauls. Finally, anthropological theory informs some observations on the pivotal role of the Carnyx in Gallic culture, society, and life. The Gauls, a loose grouping of tribes in Central and Western Europe, associated by their common language and culture, were known to the Greeks and Romans because of the Gauls' frequent attacks on them, attractive targets as they were with their settled cities, agricultural prosperity, and accumulated wealth. The Gauls' nomadic life allowed them to attack, retreat, regroup, and attack again, so their assaults seemed unexpected, sudden, and relentless. Their capacity to organize made these attacks more than mere raids, and their skill with metalworking and their facility with horses and chariots created weapons and tactics that were long a match and more for the Greeks and Romans. The fact that they were finally defeated and pacified by Caesar in Gaul and Claudius in Britain is due less to Roman military superiority than to the subsequent Roman occupation of these territories, which in turn led to settled communities and growing wealth and prosperity from increased trade and agriculture that made going elsewhere, let alone attacking, seem redundant to the Gauls. The Gauls attacked Antiochus I Soter and his Hellenistic Seleucid Empire in Asia Minor in 278 BCE as part of a more general assault on Greece from the north, but were repulsed and driven into the arid central highlands in an area that came to be known as Galatia. Around 230 BCE, the Gauls again attempted an attack on the wealthier eastern Asia Minor, now from their regional base in Galatia. They were again repulsed, this time by Attalus I of Pergamon, who commissioned and erected sculptures commemorating this attack. Copies were given to Athens, and some made their way to Rome. The thick, stringy hair, drooping mustaches, coarse features, odd war trumpets, and dramatic battle behavior of the Gauls depicted in these sculptures created stunning and memorable images, and of course resonated with the Greeks and Romans, who had also experienced their own Gallic attacks from the north. Roman history, of course, breathlessly records the tale of the Gauls invading Rome itself in 390 BCE and driving the Romans onto the Capitoline, where the Capitoline geese alerted guards to the assault on the sacred hill itself. Then the Romans paid the Gauls 1,000 pounds of gold to leave Rome, but that searing memory fed and multiplied the fears around later experiences with the Gauls, most notably Marius' great victories in Cisalpine Gaul at the end of the 2nd century BCE, and then, of course, Caesar's conquest of the Gauls in the 50s BCE. The Greeks also experienced a Gallic attack on the sacred and wealthy site of Delphi in 279 BCE, where the word Carnyx, a Gallic word, is first employed in classical literature to describe the war trumpet used in the assault. Caesar later mentions the Carnyx in his famous commentaries on the war in Gaul, and Claudius also notes the fearsome war trumpet in his invasion of Britain in 43 CE. Diodorus Siculus, a Greek historian of the 1st century BCE, writes about the Gauls in his Universal History. Quote, "Their trumpets, again, are of a peculiar barbarian kind. They blow into them and produce a harsh sound which suits the tumult of war. The battle horn of the Gauls thus became one of the most distinctive identifying elements of the Gallic warrior for the Greeks and Romans. The sculptures of Attalus I of around 230-220 BCE do not show the Carnyx itself, but rather a simpler curved war horn, perhaps because the presence and sound of the Carnyx were known to the sculptor at that point, but not its distinctive appearance. And so it was depicted in a style familiar to the artist and his audience. This Roman copy of the Hellenistic original actually appears to show the large, curved Roman cornu. So this detail may have been added when the Roman copy was made. The earliest depictions of the actual Carnyx are seen on Roman coins concerned with the defeat of the Gauls in 119 BCE in the region of Narbonne in southern France. Subsequently, the Roman colony of Narbo Martius was founded in 118 BCE, when this military colony was established in the same area to secure the land route on the newly constructed Roman roads between Italy and Spain. The coinage for the colony was minted in an unusual series of 5 types, with 2 senior foundation officials listed in the exurd on the reverse, and 5 junior officials, each with their own issue and name on the obverse. But its iconography is even more unusual, with the head of Roma in her military helmeted aspect on the obverse, and a Gaul standing victoriously in a biga and holding a spear and a Carnyx. The depiction of a victorious Gaul on coinage minted as a result of Gallic defeats can only be explained by the fact that the coinage, serrated to ensure integrity in foreign territory, was minted for use in the colony and environs as a part of a Romanization effort. But in order for the colony to be successful in an environment with a hostile or at least neutral hinterland, it had to be appealing to both Roman settlers and Gallic inhabitants alike. Compare the unserrated coinage of Marcus Furius Philus of 119 BCE, indicating the Roman victories around Narbo Martius of that year, with a more normal Gallic trophy display on the reverse. Not so generous to defeated Gauls is the later coinage of Julius Caesar after his final defeat of Vercingetorix and the alliance of Gallic tribes at Alesia in 52 BCE. This coinage, however, was obviously intended for the Roman market, and here we see the more customary iconography of defeat with Gauls with their typical wild, unkempt hair, coarse features, and shabby clothing, sitting shackled beneath trophy displays of their battle gear and weaponry, which always includes an identifying Carnyx. Defeated men, even women, sit dejectedly, while the downcast visage of perhaps Gallia herself, with a Carnyx behind her head, compares with contemporaneous obverses of a finely coiffed, bejeweled Roma. Vercingetorix himself is probably likewise shown, gaunt and defeated in portraits dating from 48 BCE, while he was in the Tullianum prison in Rome, awaiting Caesar's triumph in 46 BCE before his death by strangulation. Finally, Carnyces also appear on Trajan's column of 116 CE, which records his battles in Dacia. The Carnyces mostly appear with war trophies of captured enemy, along with their weapons and armor, as we have seen in the Roman coins of the late 2nd and 1st centuries BCE. When we situate these depictions of Carnyces within the Roman imagination of the Gauls, we see that the Romans used the grotesque animalistic shape of the Carnyx, along with its blaring, crude sound, to represent, otherize, and essentially primitivize the Gauls in order to diminish and minimize the real threat that they represented. and convert the terror that they generated into contempt. As the cultural anthropologist Dan Sperber and political theorist David Kurtzer point out, an object like the Carnyx was an actual part of Gallic life, but to the Romans it represented all of their unarticulated fears about their enemy. It was an object upon which these dark anxieties could be projected, localized, managed, and contained. When we turn our attention to the Carnyx as it appears in Gallic culture, a different picture emerges. A Gallic silver gilded vessel depicting Carnyx players worked in a fine repoussé technique and dating to between 150 and 50 CE, was found in northern Denmark in 1891, but was probably made far to the south in a Gallic metalworking center. Called the Gundestrup cauldron after its fine spot, it is the largest silver artifact so far surviving from Iron Age Europe and was clearly an object of prestige metalwork used for hospitality and ceremonial purposes by Gallic elites. Although much of the iconography is obscure, though clearly of religious and political significance, the scene with the Carnyx players plainly shows a commander directing groups of infantry and cavalry off to battle, accompanied by Carnyx players as part of the military unit. Along with the Carnyces, rectangular shields with a central boss and boar-headed and other animal-headed helmets show that Gallic elements that the Romans also picked out and emphasize the martial nature of the Carnyces that the Romans also saw. The Carnyx players demonstrate how the Carnyx was played for battle, held straight up in the air as the musicians marched in order to project the harsh sound as far as possible. More significant than this, however, the presence of this military scene with the Carnyx players on a vessel used for ceremonial and banqueting occasions reveals how embedded military activities were in the cultural and ceremonial life of the Gauls, and how important Carnyx players were in any martial scene included in ceremonial objects like this. Though apparently hidden by its original owner in a bog, and therefore lacking any archaeological, social, or cultural context, the combination of religious and political iconography in the cauldron itself, together with the military scene, creates on its own a cultural and social context for the use and function of this object within the Gallic world, a context where the military and the Carnyx in particular are important and significant parts of any ceremonial or social event. Prior to 2004, only 5 actual Carnyces had been found, discovered individually and randomly in Scotland, Germany, France, Romania, and Switzerland. They show the spread and range of Gallic settlements and culture all over Central Europe and far into the British Isles, but their lack of significant archaeological context made it difficult before 2004 to use the actual artifacts to learn anything more about the Carnyx than its metal composition and construction and how it was likely to have been played. Of course, these are not insignificant achievements, and the Leicesterstown Deskford Carnyx head, found at the farm of Leicesterstown in Deskford in northeastern Scotland in 1816 is a good case in point. Only the boar's head bell survives, but its shape, closely resembling a wild boar with its upturned snout and its detail, describing the folds of skin around a boar's face, confirmed the fine metalwork that the Gauls, as far-flung as northern Scotland, were capable of producing. Careful analysis of its metal and construction has allowed archaeologists and musicologists to appreciate the skill and care that went into the construction of this Carnyx. A number of exact reproductions of it have enabled musicians to play the Carnyx and understand its versatility and variety in sound. Such close, thoughtful, and imaginative study of a surviving example of a Gallic Carnyx has had the effect of preparing the way for understanding a new and carefully excavated Gallic military and religious deposit in France. In 2004, 7 Carnyx, one almost complete, were discovered in a Gallic military and religious site dating to the time of Caesar's conquest in Tintignac, France, in southern France near Limoges. Along with swords, scabbards, helmets, spearheads, and a shield, as well as animal remains and a cauldron, the Carnyx were found in a pit in the yard of a Gallic temple that was surrounded by a palisade. Ritual deposits, as this one seems to be, as well as sacrifices and feasts, appear to have taken place regularly in this area. In particular, one of the Carnyx seems to have been constructed so that it could be played not vertically, as for the battlefield, but horizontally, as for some different purpose, which the excavators suggest was for a religious ritual. The anthropologists Catherine Bell and Alfred Gell note the importance of seeing objects in their cultural contexts, and clearly at Tintignac, the ritualistic and religious role of the Carnyx is as important as its military use. Millet Geifman, Verity Platt, and Michael Squire, in their co-edited volume, The Embodied Object in Classical Antiquity, analyze how an object's use and function transforms, quote, the boundaries between bodies and objects, unquote, and affects cultural identity and cohesion. This analysis aptly describes the Carnyx and its player. The player of the Carnyx is inevitably conjoined with the instrument in his mouth, creating in the player a ritualistic, religious, and oral bond between his person and the Carnyx, and by extension, with the ritual participants in the religious sanctuary and social world in which it is embedded. As an object of ritual, religious significance, as well as social and cultural importance, the Carnyx and its music transform both the player of the Carnyx and those around him, creating a liminal, apotropaic space that provides a context for cultural memory and social identity. Again, political theorist David Kurtzer and cultural anthropologist Dan Sperber suggest that objects like the Carnyx functioned as a cultural symbol, containing a variety of meanings. In this case, the meanings were destructive as well as apotropaic and protective. They were contradictory and consequently inherently ambiguous, as many symbols are. The finds in this carefully excavated and documented site show that the Carnyx should be considered such a cultural symbol for the Gauls, used in battle to frighten and disorient the enemy, but also used in religious as well as social and cultural settings, as in the Gundestrup cauldron. In the latter settings, it functioned as an apotropaic symbol to protect, and as a social symbol to unite and coalesce the Gauls into the great power that they were for a very long time. Thank you.
Thank you, Marsha. Thank you for moving us beyond the Greek and Roman world into their neighbors, which is a very nice thing to do. Questions? Oh, doesn't matter, whoever.
Just for the sake of music archaeology, I found it highly instructive when you said playing exact reproductions while showing images of people playing wildly modified reproductions. Nobody there playing an exact reproduction. Most of them, all of those in the images, added the S-shaped mouthpiece, so they would no longer play in the ancient way of craning the necks, playing upwards. Nobody does that, but this seems to have
Except on the
been...
Gundestrup cauldron.
Nobody nowadays does
Yeah,
it. Everybody in Antiquity
Yeah.
did it. So
Yeah.
all those performers are not experiencing what it means to play a Carnyx at all. So some play them horizontally with the face showing downwards onto the earth because it's much easier to play as a modern trombone player, and others at the S-shaped to look like a crossover between an ancient Celt and a Viking. but nobody really tries to see what it means, how it feels, facing the sky themselves,
Yeah.
and maintaining what you left out, an erection, because many of those few images, some of those few images show us a nude warrior maintaining his erection while playing the thing. So that's a phallic symbol, and that's also not shown to modern audiences.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much. That's so interesting. I have about a million questions, but I'm going to ask one. So I've always kind of thought of these in a purely military context, and I've always kind of imagined they would be quite loud if you're using them to signal across a battlefield. So if you're using them in a ritual context, do we know, are we using the same instruments? Are they equally as loud? Are they as loud as I'm imagining? And then are they equally as loud in a ritual context? Or do we have like kind of a different ritual Carnyx that's not as loud? Just because I noticed the one, it was a pot or something, I can't remember, where there were 3 Carnyx players in a row, and my immediate thought was that's a lot of Carnyx. This one, and I was like, what's going on with this? What's going on with this? This is a military operation, it looks like. And then I thought, in a ritual, are we using the same kind of volume? Are we using the same quantity? This is a very scattered question. Do you have any thoughts?
I don't know that anybody knows, but I would imagine that the same Carnyces were used, because those are the ones, if you use them in battle, you want to use those very ones in, I would think, a ritual or a communal social setting, because those are the ones that have the symbolic and apotropaic value. As for sound, I heard a Carnyx player. He came to where I was living, weirdly, a traveling Carnyx player. He came to a festival where I was, so I went to hear it, and he was playing in a very, very big room, and it was just horribly loud sound. I brought my little daughter thinking she would enjoy it, and she didn't like it at all. She was covering up her ears and asking to go home, and it was just awful. But our ancient musicologist here, I was talking, and he said he's heard Carnegies played that are much softer. It's a matter of, I think it's kind of like any brass instrument. It's how you use the embouchure, your lips. I can also say that this guy, I forgot his name. What was his name? The traveling Carnyx?
John Kenny?
John Kenny. Yeah. He was selling CDs of Carnyx music. There are people now who compose Carnyx music for groups of Carnyx. It's like a Carnyx quartet, say. And so I bought a CD. And it's I wouldn't say it's beautiful, but the music was soft and melodious and kind of going places. So I would say it can be done. How the ancients did it, I don't know. Whether the blaring sound was important in even in a social setting, or whether they would modulate the tone. I don't know, but it can be done.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that wonderful talk, and you're making me want to reread Caesar's Gallic Wars just for all my great love of Vercingetorix, and thank you for highlighting him in this as well. Earlier in your talk, you were mentioning the Roman cornu that might have been added into one of those statues, and I was thinking especially about the sort of G-shaped Roman cornu that we see a lot of times in reproductions, and I was wondering, since you were talking about the audible context here, how there might be a differentiation in sound. Some reproductions of cornus I've heard sound very, very shrill, which was surprising to me. And I didn't know if there was, one, a way that we could confirm how the cornu sounded, and two, if there's any change in cornu sounds once they interact with the Gauls. Is there anything that they might change to reflect perhaps the sound of this Carnyx?
That is a really interesting question. I've only thought of the cornu as just, well, it replaced the Carnyx, which should have been there, and I have given it no more thought because, you know, this is my Carnyx work. But that is a very interesting question. I will pursue that because I imagine there are actual ancient cornui, I think, that have been found, and I imagine they're blown. Replicas have been made carefully. Metal analysis replicas have been made to try and imitate the metal composition, and so do they sound shrill compared to the Carnyx? How did they interact with the Carnyx? Fascinating question.
Thank you.
Other questions? Well, let us then thank all of our speakers. Thank you so much.